That was a great panel session, and we're going to do a changeover here, but some of you may have noticed, maybe not, there's like a little bit of noise just in the building generally. There is, I've been asked to tell you, there is a liquor workers strike. It's nothing to do with us. They're protesting outside a liquor event that's actually taking place. As I say, it's not related to the World Summit AI. The protests, which are peaceful protests, are taking place outside the Palais and also on the ground floor. We're expecting it to last about 1 hour. I'm not sure what time it started, but it's only going to last an hour. And there is a police presence, but we really apologize for the noise. And we just want to ask that you remain in the summit area if you can. That would be great. So that's my second PSA of the day. But now on to our next speaker, who we're very lucky to have. She's here to talk about reinforcement learning for therapeutics. She spends her time between McGill University, where she holds a Canada CIFAR AI chair in the School of Computer Science, and DeepMind Montreal, where she's been leading the research team since its formation in October 2017. Please give a really warm welcome to Doina Precup.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this talk. I'm going to talk about reinforcement learning for therapeutics, and this is work that's done at McGill University and Mila with a bunch of fantastic students and collaborators. So all of it is sort of on the academic side of my brain. So what is reinforcement learning? Reinforcement learning is about learning from interaction with an environment. It's about an agent that gets some observations, can do things in the environment, and receives a numerical reward signal. And really, the inspiration from this came from animal learning and cognitive science theories. But part of the appeal, as Rich Sutton has said, is that this is really, in essence, the AI problem in a microcosm. And so initial successes of reinforcement learning have been in the area of games. The top two panels there show the game of Go and StarCraft. These were agents developed at Google DeepMind. The bottom is actually a set of games on the Android system that we've open sourced a couple of years back with my team at Google DeepMind in Montreal. They're very challenging, much more challenging actually, in fact. But what we want is really to move towards more realistic, complex tasks. And so these are some examples of complex control tasks, some balloons that my colleague Mark Belmar learned how to control using reinforcement learning techniques, and controlling plasma inside fusion reactors. This is a really complicated control problem, and one which, if we could crack, we would really have a much improved energy future. So all of this is very exciting. It's very much in the realm of reinforcement learning. Now, when I work on applications, most of the time I work on the medical side of things, partly because I find that to be a very inspiring domain, and partly because we have lots of problems to solve in that domain. And so what I'm going to talk about is, can we use reinforcement learning to help therapeutics, both in the sense of drug dosing and in the sense of drug design? And whenever we try to set up a reinforcement learning system for this type of problem, we think about how to formulate the problem, what are the observations we take into account, what are the actions, what's the reward signal. We think about how can we learn, is there a simulator that's available, or are there good data sets that are available? And then we think about the algorithms themselves. Do we have the right kinds of algorithms? And if not, what's missing? What are the ingredients that we need to develop? And a lot of my thinking actually goes into that third category, but we can't really get there without the first two. And so what I want to do today is to give you a flavor of how we think about setting up the problem and what kind of algorithmic innovations are needed in order to solve the problem. So the first thing I want to talk about is a case study on precision drug dosing. This is work led by my PhD student, Shumana Basu. And the motivation here is that drug development usually looks at populations. We do clinical trials with lots of people in them. We assess efficacy, safety, et cetera, on the population. But actually, doctors treat individual patients, and these individual patients have a lot of variation. And in fact, in order to be included in a clinical trial, it's actually quite hard. There's a lot of exclusion criteria, including things like pregnancy, of course, having certain comorbidities, taking already certain kinds of medications, including very common medications. These are all problems that lead to people not being able to participate in these trials, which means that the population is not necessarily representative of the individuals that are going to be treated. And oftentimes this mismatch is actually, for example, affecting women more than men, because oftentimes women are excluded because of pregnancy and other considerations like that. So what's precision drug dosing? It means trying to tailor the amount of medication to the individual patient in order to ensure the greatest benefit to that patient and also the least risk. And that often has to take into account some individual variation in order to really understand how this patient might actually react to these doses. So if we have a simulator for the problem at hand, then we can try to see whether reinforcement learning algorithms would provide a good way to do this. Oftentimes the observation space is actually quite clear. There's some biological readings, maybe some test results that help us with that. The actions can be various doses of the medication. The reward signal is a little bit less clear. I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, there are some challenges. This problem is not exactly like the textbook reinforcement learning problem. So for example, when you administer a medication, the effect is not immediate. Actually, the effect ramps up over time and then sort of decays over time. So there's a response to medication that is both delayed and prolonged, and that doesn't cleanly fit into the reinforcement learning strategy. But this is where we can work both with our creativity a little bit, so inventing a bit of a different model, and also with adopting some of the assumptions in the literature, for example, in the pharmacology literature, where people do study the decay of medications in the organism in order to sort of fix this. Reward is very messy. So I included this big formula at the bottom there, not because I want you to read it, but because I want you to get a sense of what it takes, for example, to craft a reward function in the case of dosing insulin to control blood glucose for a patient. It's quite complicated. It's a trial and error process, and it's really important to get it right in order for this to work. Now, if we do and we sort of use our improved models, we can actually get quite good performance. What you'll see in reinforcement learning papers is a graph like the one on the bottom with curves happily going up, showing you that, according to some measure of performance, this is working well. But actually, when you talk to doctors, they don't care about that. They care about a more detailed view of the data. So something more like the pictures on top, where we're looking at how many hyperglycemic episodes have there been while we were administering according to our treatment compared to, let's say, giving a fixed dose that was designed by a doctor. How many hypoglycemic events were there? And one of the things that we find is that when we use our algorithms, the treatment is more stable and the extremes are lessened. And so that's sort of the middle lines in the top plots over there. Now, just to wrap this up, reinforcement learning can provide some effective precision drug dosing policies, but the reward design is crucial. It's crucial for us to understand a little bit the problem, the drug dynamics in this case, and also to find some good algorithms, so ones that have good enough sample efficiency. Now, in this case, we were also very fortunate that there is a standard simulator called from the University of Padova that a lot of doctors are actually using in order to model this problem and understand it. And so we could train reinforcement learning algorithms offline in the simulator. That doesn't always happen, right? This is sort of a happy case. And so developing simulators is actually quite a big open problems, and also evaluating these algorithms properly. Now, therapeutics is not only about dosing, it's also about drug discovery, right? Discovering new medications and making the cycle of discovery more time efficient and cost efficient. And so I'll show you some ideas that were initiated by my PhD student, Emmanuel Bengio, and have since been picked up, and there's quite a vibrant community at Mila that's working on this problem. So the idea here is that we're trying to find molecules that have particular properties, for example, that bind to particular targets. And at one level, you can think of this as a reinforcement learning problem where you start with some skeleton of a molecule, and then you're going to add to it various compounds. You might also remove some compounds if you want to make this more flexible, up until you have something that you think might work, and then you evaluate it using a reward function. So we have some observations and we have some actions. The reward, again, is a little bit messy, because in this case, what we want is we want to evaluate whether this particular molecule would bind to the target. So we want some kind of binding affinity score. But actually, there's lots of other criteria that we also want. For example, we want it not to be toxic, to be safe, to be stable, and so on. But in this particular case, we actually focus just on the binding affinity, because it's much easier to kind of have just that in mind. And even so, there's sort of two levels of reward. There's a learned reward function that we can evaluate quickly in order to get a reading whether our candidates are interesting. And then there's a much more detailed reward function that we can compute by sending this to a lab that runs a more accurate simulation. Eventually, we would send it to an actual chemistry lab that does some physical experiments. And so there's quite a long loop of improving the reward function, and that does need to be done over time. But we have observations, we have a noisy reward function, it's learned, we can do reinforcement learning in principle. There's one problem, which is that reinforcement learning is a really good optimization algorithm, but it's actually not something that's designed to explore a space very much. And what we want in this case is we want a whole bunch of candidate molecules of different types, because we don't know what's going to be safe or easy to provide or be cost-effective for a patient. And so the idea of this algorithm that we developed is basically to have a framework for continually sampling the space of all possible candidates, roughly in proportion with how good they might be. And it turns out that this is an optimization criterion that's very close to reinforcement learning, that we can solve by reinforcement learning algorithms, and we can take ideas that we already have and kind of use them there. So this actually, I think my slides are not going. Okay, so that's sort of like the cartoon of this algorithm. This works well both in terms of pre-training as well as in terms of active learning. So this approach is sort of the blue curve that's going up there. We're comparing against the standard reinforcement learning algorithm, which is in green, and then against the standard industry solution, which is in orange. And you can see that both of the reinforcement learning solutions are actually working better. But if we try and customize our algorithm to really capture the characteristics of the problem, we're a little bit better. The curves in the graph towards me are the ones that are actually showing you what happens if we do the complete circle, where we go back to the lab, we get some data, we improve the reward function, and we iterate this process. And that actually gives, obviously, better results. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's still way cheaper and faster than doing sort of drug discovery from scratch. So just to sort of wrap up this part of the talk, we have a generative model for generating discrete objects like molecules. It can actually be used for generating all kinds of discrete objects, like general graphs, for example. And it's also a general setup for solving black box optimization problems and exploration problems. So we're quite excited about it. There's lots of groups of students exploring this for building, for example, causal models of the world and building various data analysis pipelines. But again, sort of the reward function was really crucial here, and learning it from data and tweaking it as we go along is very important in terms of getting these algorithms to work. So it's not all the algorithm, it's also this aspect of reward design that's quite important. So just to wrap up, reinforcement learning for therapeutics is actually, in my opinion, a really big untapped area of research. We do have challenges, like sort of taking into consideration the specifics of the problem and designing good reward functions. We also have algorithmic challenges. So for example, reinforcement learning algorithms are still pretty inefficient in terms of the amount of data that they need to get better. And so improving the sample efficiency is really important. And this is, in fact, a good challenge for young researchers coming into the field, because it gives them a very concrete problem where we can take back the understanding there, take it back to the fundamentals, improve something in our algorithms, and then go back and solve this problem better. So I will stop there, and I would be very happy to take some questions if there are.
Thank you for your talk, but also for your work. That's pretty groundbreaking stuff. I'm opening it up because I know that Doina is happy to take questions. If you have a question, and be brave, raise your hand aloft. Oh, I can see over there. And if you are comfortable to do so, please say who you are and where you come from, and then your question, obviously.
Yeah, I'm testing. Okay. Hi there, Nicholas, CTO at Smart One AI. I did a lot of work back in my doctorate in genetic algorithms applied to robotics and searching the solution space. So how do you see this latest evolution of using reinforcement learning to explore the solution space compared to those older algorithms?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So genetic algorithms, evolutionary methods are, to me, a facet that's very related to reinforcement learning. It's a different way of organizing a search over a very large combinatorial space. The advantage of reinforcement learning, in my opinion, is that it makes the search typically more efficient, a bit more directed, because we can really build gradients in, right? And that gives us a better sense of which direction we're moving in. But a lot of the reinforcement learning algorithms that we use actually have a similar flavor in the sense that they do sample multiple solutions, and we don't have recombination exactly per se, but again, people are thinking of blending ideas from genetic algorithms and reinforcement learning in order to make this exploration more efficient.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions on Doina's work in reinforcement learning? Oh, I can see a hand, our roving mics. Sorry to give you a workout. Can you keep your hand up? Just so they can, there you go, thank you. Right at the back there.
Hi, Mark Oliver, work for the Fonds FTQ. We're investors in life science. So you mentioned mostly binding affinity. So I'm just wondering how reinforced model work when you have all the variables that you want to do when designing a drug, which is actually really hard since some of them don't work well together.
Yeah. That's a really great question, and so I'll give you my 2 cents on that, is that we are actually learning a lot about this problem from large language models, and which also have a lot of complexity to them. You want them to be factual, you want them to be grammatical, you want them to be entertaining. There's like all these things that we desire, which are a little bit hard to quantify, and so the blueprint there has been to use learning from preferences. So showing examples, pairs of examples, or sets of examples to a person or to an expert and asking which one's better. And we've actually made tremendous progress in terms of reinforcement learning from this human feedback to try and incorporate that. And I think the way that complex problems, like sort of the whole spectrum of criteria that are part of drug design, are going to be handled is actually by going to a learning from preferences setup, where we focus less on a single numerical reward. We focus more on, here are some examples, can you tell us which of these is better? And then we take that data and we do reinforcement learning with that. And there's a great amount of excitement, research, and literature that's coming in this area that I think is going to be useful. I also think that some of the stuff that is important for actual design is not going to be easily sort of representable at the time that we train these agents, and so they're still necessary to have an outer loop, right, where we do some kind of validation and those criteria come into play.
I think we have time for another question if there are any. Oh, there we go, perfect. We have another hand, and this side of the room, which has been quite quiet so far this morning, so well done to that lady for elevating this side of the room. Hey.
Can you hear me? Oh, great. Hi, my name is Andrea Tofik. I work for SAP, which is a big software company out of Germany. I'm actually a former student of yours, Doina, so it's great to hear from you again. My question is on the more vast applications of drugs that are over the counter. So is this being looked at all for the aspirins, the Advils, the cold medications of the world?
So using secondary purpose, like using them for a secondary purpose? Not that I'm aware of. It's not been a topic that machine learning, RL people have looked at very much. But I think, again, one could imagine taking, for example, the data that already exists from previous clinical trials and trying to mine that data for these kind of uses. It's a little bit harder because in some sense, if you've collected the data narrowly, you don't have certain things recorded, you might not be able to do well with that. But if we had a sort of a data set that has more information in it beyond just the exact sort of trial efficacy, one could think about that problem as well.
Okay, I think that's just about all we have time for, but please give a huge round of applause to Doina Precup.
Thank you very much.